Okay, today we're going a little further in some of the historical underpinnings for, American, our system that we have and that we utilize. Okay, we're looking at, again, just, timeline. Um, Remember, the whole purpose of a colony is to be a source of raw materials, to be taken back to the colonizer, the power in the situation, and then to serve as a market for finished products. So it's the ideas for both. Okay, so the interesting thing is that although this situation existed, in reality, for almost 100 years, we have a situation where the colonies were given quite a bit of freedom, and um, there it's one of those things where, although in law there was a lot of control, but in reality there wasn't much control. Now, as France increased their presence throughout Canada, and we also see the same thing in New Orleans, coming from the south also. The English citizens in America, the colonists, felt that they wanted more British protection. Okay, so eventually, we're going to understand France and England were fighting this on and off global war for supremacy, and America was just one theater where this was happening. And so the French and Indian War was the French and natives, Indians, versus the United States, or I'm sorry, American colonists and the English. Remember, we don't have the United States at this point. Okay, so this war cost a lot of money, and with this idea of expectations, the British expected increased loyalty from the American colonists because they had sent so much manpower and money and to pay. There was a lot of debt that had actually been built up, and so they expected American colonists to actually pay for this through increased taxes. And so we see these series of taxes to pay for this war. Um, the colonists expected increased freedom. So you have this situation where we have these taxes are enacted. There's some sort of boycott or protest, and then we see this repeating sort of cycle of repeal, and then we have new taxes being implemented, and then another type of protest, and then additional taxes in different ways. So as the colonists protest, Britain clamps down more, and all of that brings about a rise in nationalism over time. And so it's one of those things where, you know, um, Americans weren't seeing themselves as American until they came into conflict more and more with the British. Okay, so the first Continental Congress was seen as a body to put together a list of things that they want from the king, and obviously one of it is they want increased representation where they actually have a vote in Parliament, and so as and again from the British, they looked at that as a declaration of independence, whereas the English, the Americans didn't see it that way. They saw it as petitioning their government. The right to petition government had long been a part of British system, and so um, as the British, their thinking was, okay, we need to secure, all of our arms bunkers, make sure we have safety. If there's going to be increased, things like that. We see April 19th, 1775 is where we have our first class at Lexington, later at Concord. And in effect, so the war began long before actual independence, about a year if you look at it there. And so, you have this war effort. Second Continental Congress was put together. Okay, we need something to organize and put together an army and start to pay for this, and that's what the Second Continental Congress was, a stopgap thing to kind of sort of figure out, okay, what can we do? Um, and so as the war goes along, and that whole year of fighting, war mentality starts to sink in, where it's not a matter of fighting for your rights, it's you're fighting off an enemy. And so you have this growing nationalism, this growing sense of disconnect from England. And Thomas Paine was the one that put it down very succinctly, very simply in his pamphlet called Common Sense. And he really just said what was on a lot of people's mind. And it was one of those things where when we all know that we all know, it becomes easier for all of us to do it, because we all know that we all want to do this. And so it wasn't until about June where they just said, okay, we're going to have an actual Declaration of Independence, some written document. And knowing that this is going to be a historical document, it took time to put this together. It wasn't until July that the Declaration was signed. And at that point, the idea is each colony would become an independent country. And so if you look at the bits of this, it's very interesting that you have a little bit of Hobbes, a little bit of Locke, and notice this idea of the social contract. All men are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights, securities rights. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers for the consent of the governed. That's an exact statement of the social contract theory. And then when you look at what Locke said, very similar concept. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. And that's a tremendous statement when you think about it. And to actually write this, the reason John Hancock gets so much play in the media is the way in which he signed it, and each person who was signing it knew they were taking a tremendous chance in terms of what was going to happen. It was not a done deal that this was all going to work. And so what was essentially created, when each leader signed this from all the different colonies, you had a nice compact list that the British could then use to eliminate the leadership of America. And this is, and they knew this. They knew this. They were entrusting each other their lives. And there's some names we see. There's John Adams on there, and some of the other people that we know. Thomas Jefferson. We can see that right there. Following the initial invasion into Iraq, the theory was, okay, we need to create some system, some way for Americans' troops to locate and identify the leadership. And so, obviously, and if you've ever been in the military, particularly the Army, one of the most popular games is spades. So obviously the ace of spades is considered one of the most valuable, one of the more valuable cards. And so Saddam Hussein and his sons and then his top generals were all given the highest ranking moving on down. And so we do a similar thing when we have our FBI's most wanted. This is updated as people are caught and new people are put on the list. And and this is one of those things where we had essentially given a similar list to the British, and so there was no guarantee that this thing was actually going to work out.